Roll call. Joe Morales. Present. Martin Chapa. Present. David Garcia. Present. Elizabeth Ramos.
Here.
James Glusin. Dallas Salinas.
Here.
Brian Duval is present. Let the record show there is a form of board members present, and that this meeting has been posted in accordance with Government Code Chapter 551, State of Texas Open Meetings Act. We move to the moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance and toast. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to Texas, one state, under God.
This meeting will be live video streamed at https://bit.ly/3SROLQR. We move to item number 4, adoption of the agenda. Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda? Motion made by Ms. Ramos. Seconded by Mr. Morales. All those in favor say aye. Any opposition? Motion carries 6-0. Item number 5, public participation policy, BED. Do we have anyone that wishes to address the board?
No, sir.
No one has signed up to address the board. We did receive a public comment by email. Mr. Maddox, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, sir. Mr. President, Board of Trustees, it is our advice that the board does not get into the habit of reciting or reading any written submitted works for public comment. It is there for the members of the public to show up and present in person. And also, I have reviewed this comment, and it's my opinion that the contents of it are more ripe for a DGBA local complaint or for a meeting to the individual supervisor. So it's personnel in nature and not fit for public comment.
I will comment that I think the writer of the email probably got bad information that came indirectly through me. However, I agree with you, this is a personnel matter, and if the writer of the letter is listening online, please trust that your issue has been taken under advisement, and there will be a future discussion at a future board meeting. We move now to item number 6, new business. There's none. Item number 7, the board will enter into closed session in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code 551.071, and 551.074 to deliberate and consider the following. A, consider resignation of contracted employee. B, discussion with legal counsel regarding legal and personnel matters. No action will be taken until we return to open session. We are entering closed session at 5:34 p.m.
I'm going to switch over to the closed session Zoom link. Alex? It is we are. Let me just check the microphone. Yes, we are. Yes.
Oh.
Back with the group section.
We now return to open session to take necessary action on matters which the board may discuss in open session, upon which actions may be taken. We are returning to open session at 5:44 p.m. Item 8A, consider approval of resignation of contracted employee. Dr. Pettis?
I recommend that the following personnel, as discussed in closed session, be approved to be retired or be resigned.
All right. You've heard the recommendation of the superintendent that we accept the resignation of the contracted employee. Is there a motion to approve? Motion made by Mr. Garcia. Seconded by Mr. Morales. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposition? Motion carries 5-1. Hearing no further action, I move that this board meeting be adjourned at 5:45 p.m. We now are entering into a workshop to discuss the following. Item A, 2022-2023 budget from Dr. Pitts and the 2022 tax rates. We're actually going to take those in reverse order. We'll start with the tax rate. Mr. Pitts, Dr. Pitts.
Thank you. We are going to take these items in reverse, as Mr. Kupal said, because our bond attorneys and a financial advisor are on the call right now. We're going to start with the tax rate, and with the tax rate, there's two parts of it. There's the M&O part of the tax rate, and there is the INS part of the tax rate. The M&O is used to pay all our district operations, and it's what we always refer to as the general fund. And that is set by the state. The maximum that we can set our tax rate at is set by the state. Since our property values have been rising, our MCR, our maximum compressed tax rate, has been reduced. The reason why they do that is they do not want to charge taxpayers anymore when our property values are rising, so they decrease the M&O tax rate. At the same time, what the board has been doing is the board has increased the INS tax rate to keep the total tax rate the same. Now, we finally have an interesting situation where we haven't had before. At this time, the INS tax rate is now raising to a rate that is greater than needed to pay all our debts for that year. This is the first time we have been in that situation. So we have an opportunity to use some of that to pay off some of our debt. And I'm going to show you what our current debt is right now. Here is our current debt. We currently owe $56 million in principal. As of 2021, Now, as of 2022, that has been reduced to around $51 million. So we have debt that we're going to be paying all the way out to year, if you look at the bottom of the schedule, to year 2043. But also, if you notice on the schedule, right now we are paying about $4.6 million of principal and interest every year. We're going to be paying that all the way till 2033. That means we really can't go out for any more bond debt or bond elections for about 11 years from now. That's our current situation. Our last bond election for the high school and for the domes, we maxed out on our debt, and we cannot go out for any more debt until we get that resolved. So that means that we can't go out for projects like fixing the track or building a new school that we might need to do for at least 11 years. But we have an opportunity right now because the M&O tax rate has been decreased. The INS is being increased. So by keeping the tax rate the same, we can pay off quite a bit of our debt. Now, I'm gonna let the bond attorneys talk in just a minute about the defeasance, but as it turns out, this year, there was a proposition to increase the homestead exemption from $25,000 to $40,000 this year, which means that even if we left the tax rate the same, the average taxpayer is gonna pay $118 less on their taxes this year, even if we left it the same. What we're proposing is to, again, let the M&O tax rate decrease, let the INS increase to keep the tax rate the same. Average taxes would go down by $118, and we would use the excess INS collections to pay off some of that $51 million in debt so that we could try to decrease this time schedule to a level so that we could go out for a bond earlier if possible if we really needed to build a new school. And not only that, we would be able to decrease the interest and hopefully in the future, we'll be able to decrease the tax rate. But right now, the tax rate is at its level because of all the debt that we have. That's why it is what it is. So in order to collect more INS taxes than is needed to pay the actual debt for that year and to apply it to our owed debt over the next 3 years, the board would need to pass something called a cash defeasance, where the excess debt collections would be applied to some of this principal and interest in the next 3 years. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Robert P. Hedina, our financial advisor, and then we'll invite our bond counsels on the call as well too to talk a little bit about the process. Robert?
Good evening, Dr. Pitts, members of the board. Robert Hedina. We are the school district's financial advisor at the Hedina, Galvan, and Lawrence. And also, as Dr. Pitts stated, we have Mr. Juan Aguilera, bond counsel for the school district of Escamian-Panic. The cash defeasance again, and I'll try to touch a bit of it of the surface and let Mr. Aguilera go into the details. But there is an opportunity here in order for us to increase the INS tax rate for next fiscal year. We know we're not having a bond election in order to pay off additional debt. It does not require voter approval, strictly only board approval. And Mr. Aguilera and I, we represent other issuers to where we have done cash defeasances over the last few years. And this opportunity here to raise the INS tax rate, since you're lowering the M&O, does require board action sometime this month before you approve the total tax rate for next fiscal year. But there's an opportunity here to pay off debt anywhere from the range of about $256,000 to maybe $300,000 here in the next few years. When I say the next few years, we're talking a small savings in fiscal year 23, small less debt service payment in 2024, and then we pay the bulk of that cash defeasance in 2025. And again, this requires board action in order for us to increase the INS tax rate. And I believe Dr. Pitts has probably shared some information on the tax rate analysis that we provided Dr. Pitts earlier today. The district, in the eyes of the state, is now become wealthier. And what has happened over the last few years, and I know that's something a lot of our clients don't want to hear, but in reality, there's two main components that the state of Texas TEA looks at is your property values and your average daily attendance. And the district over the last few years, your property values have increased, just shy of $1 billion. I think we have final certified at about $940.5 million net certified values. Your average daily attendance is estimated about 2,375. So those two factors have gone the opposite direction. ADA is somewhat either slowly dropped or flatlined, but the property values have increased, making the school district wealthier in the eyes of TEA. So the school district will not be receiving any form of state assistance on the interest and sinking fund tax rate side, the INS side, in order to help pay for debt. I believe, according to Dr. Pitt's calculations, this coming fiscal year, 2023, may be the last year. If everything stays as is, your property values continue to increase, average daily attendance is pretty much flatline at 2,375. 2023 could be the last year you receive any form of state aid on the interest and sinking fund side of the tax rate. And again, a cash defeasance, increasing it up to what Dr. Pitts is recommending, about 0.5191 of a tax rate in order to pay off debt, will allow the district again to pay off a cash defeasance about $256,000, more or less based on our calculations that we see today. And again, Mr. Aguilera, is there anything you want to discuss as far as the legality on why defeasance is needed and board action is required in order to increase the INS tax rate?
Let me jump in for just a second. Thank you, Robert. I wanted to say that even though we are recommending an increase in the INS rate, we're recommending the total tax rate stay the same. We're just doing I hate to use the word swap, that has a bad connotation, but as we've done the last several years, we have kept the tax rate the same by decreasing M&O, decreasing M&O, increasing INS, and because of the additional homestead exemption, taxpayers would see an average decrease in $118.54. And I'll go over that on the public notice a little bit later, but Mr. Aguilera, would you like to comment?
Yes, I would. Good afternoon, board. My name is Juan Aguilera. It's good to see you, although I'm not there, but good to see everybody there. With me today is also Humberto Aguilera. He's on the phone. He's traveling, but he's hopefully he's on right now, so he'll be able to join us in case there's any questions or that there may be from the board. As Dr. Pitts was saying, and also Mr. Tijerina, we're discussing, the overall tax rate that you have is composed of two components, and that would be the maintenance and operation taxes, which is used for your maintenance and operations of the district, and then your interest and sinking fund, which can only be used for payment of bonds. Furthermore, you can only levy a tax if you go to the taxpayers or to the voters, and if the voters approve that you go ahead and levy a tax to make payment on the bonds. So as Robert was stating, there's no requirement to go to the voters because the voters have already given you the permission or have voted to authorize you to raise taxes sufficient to be able to make payment on your bond. So that's what we've got. Now, the school districts, Chapter 45 of the Education Code provides that a school district may, and let me see if I can be able to find this thing, permits a school district to assess and levy ad valorem taxes for the payment of bonds as or before the principal and interest become due. We've used this, and as a matter of fact, it seems to be, we get called by school districts, and it just seems like right now, this is something that several school districts are contemplating or considering doing. As a matter of fact, we have 5 school districts, 5 clients that are considering defeasance right now. So because of Chapter 45 allows you to be able to make payment on or before the payments are due, then you could be able to decide to make payments beforehand, so that way you, as Dr. Pitts was stating, be paying less interest and also pay down your overall debt. If we also, legally, the bond attorneys, we like to make sure that, as you know, you cannot be able to raise taxes or levy a tax unless you have a binding obligation. You already have the binding obligation to pay the bonds, but to pay the additional principal and interest, if you decide that that's what you want to do, you can be able to do that by adopting what we call as a defeasance resolution. And in that resolution, in a nutshell, you're authorizing the superintendent of schools and your finance director, Dr. Pitts, to be able to go out and pay down the debt as needed. We consider this resolution to be a binding resolution, and it's irrevocable, so that once you go out and adopt this resolution, you identify certain maturities that you want to pay, then at that point you're obligated to pay those maturities. Then also we will set up an escrow, and the escrow is a bank account, and that money can only be used for bond payments, and that escrow will be held there for the benefit of the bondholders. Once that escrow is set, by law, you have established firm banking arrangements, and Dr. Pitts and the school district obviously can be able to then consider that those maturities or those payments have already been made and should no longer be reflected on your books. So again, school districts, Chapter 45 provides that you can be able to pay for your principal and interest on bonds when due or before they're due. And in order to be able to go out and levy a tax that is needed to pay the additional debt, you are required or will be required to adopt a defeasance resolution, which is again a binding resolution, and now you have an obligation established, and now you can go out and use those additional funds to be able to pay the principal and interest on future debt, and again, hopefully overall save the district some money and definitely pay down the debt sooner than it would normally take. Any questions?
Is there a limit to number of years in a row you can do this?
No, there's no limitation on that, because again, every year when you set your budget, you can consider being able to make payment on additional debt. So more than what is due. And so you could be able to go out and do this at the beginning, or also if you have some additional monies, we could also be able to go out at a later time on this fiscal year, this coming fiscal year, adopt another defeasance resolution to allow you to pay more. The resolution, and I should mention, get a little bit into the woods here, into the weeds. We do provide that the superintendent or the chief financial officer of the district can be able to make as I mentioned initially, can make the determination. And of course, they'll be looking for your direction as a board to tell them what to do, but they are able to, once the monies are collected, and I think that Dr. Pitts is looking at a very conservative amount, about what is it, Dr. Pitts, you're telling 97% collection rate?
97%.
Right. And so if the funds come in, if more money is collected or less money is collected, then they can make a determination as to how much debt, future debt, is going to be paid down.
Yes, sir. Dr. Pitts, if I can also add, the defeasance to increase the INS tax rate is only good for 1 year. So these kind of cash defeasances to increase the INS tax rate, it only lasts for 1 fiscal year. And again, during the middle of the year, as Mr. Aguilera stated, if for any reason you come into additional funds and you want to pay off debt, that will be a defeasance using cash on hand that you do not have to increase the INS tax rate later. But again, this defeasance that we're discussing today only lasts for 1 fiscal year. If it's adopted sometime this month, it will expire, and correct me if I'm wrong, Juan, at August 31st, 2023.
And that is correct. And thank you, Robert. That's a very important point to make, is that this defeasance resolution, since you're considering leaving or levying additional taxes, INS taxes to pay for the future bonds, then it's only good for the next fiscal year. It's just like you whenever you set you're setting your budget, you look at your budget, and then based on what your budget and your projections are, then you levy a tax. And those are considered to be obligations that you have. The same thing with this defeasance resolution. It's good for 1 fiscal year for the purposes of levying taxes. And after that point, then if you're in future years, if you want to do the same, then you would need to come in and adopt a defeasance resolution. So again, the important thing here, the key thing is you want to have a binding obligation to make payment on bonds, and to allow you to raise the additional pennies that you may need in order to pay more bonds. If you do not have that binding obligation, then by law you cannot go out and increase your INS taxes.
So let me add a couple of things. Thank you, Mr. Aguilera. First of all, this is a win-win. This is will provide $118 reduction in average taxes paid by our homesteads, by our homeowners. And at the same time, we'll be able to pay off existing debt as well too. We are planning we have currently a fund balance in INS, and we're planning, after we pay our February bond payments, to use whatever is left to add to this defeasance, and then kind of combine them. If we do them at the same time, then we'll be able to pay off more debt, and we will only have 1 cost of issuance, because there's a charge when you defease some of the bonds. But again, the amount that we save in principal and interest is going to be well worth it. At the same time, this does require board approval. So depending on what your questioning is, we would bring this for approval at next week's board meeting on the 16th. And then if it is passed, then the tax rate would be approved after the public meeting on August 23rd. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So, let's talking about paying off the debt sooner. Is that the debt that you talked about, 2043?
Yes, exactly. Because right now it's gonna take us 21 years to pay off all our debt. Well, that's hard to say. Maybe Robert Tijerina can answer this question. Right now, it wouldn't shave off any years. It would shave off the amount that we pay per year. And the biggest benefit would be 2025, but that was only for this 256,000. The bulk of that would cut it would cut how much we owe in 2025, but we're hoping to maybe somewhere north of 750,000 more once we pay our bond payments in February, and then we would really see the savings of over $1 million. But Robert would have to work out the schedule to when that what year that $1 million would be realized. Robert, do you want to add it all to that?
Yes, sir, Dr. Pitts. And right now, as you stated a few seconds ago, in 2025 is when we'll see the bulk, about 224,000 that the district will be paying less in debt if this item is approved sometime this month. We're looking at shaving off about 224,000 of principal and interest in fiscal year 25. The more debt, the defeasance that you pay off, we go in and see exactly how much you owe, and then we're able to pull out certain maturity, certain principal payments where it makes sense to give you some capacity and some relief. As Dr. Pitts stated earlier, your INS tax rate, again, as Dr. Pitts was saying, we're recommending about 51.91 for fiscal year 23. And then it hovers about 50 cents all the way down till 2032. So in fiscal year 2032, you're going to see a drop of your debt going from 4.6 million to 3.5 million. That's the time where there's what we call, and Dr. Pitt stated this earlier, debt capacity. When you have time to have a bond election, the next opportunity to add in about $1.1 million of debt payment in there to keep the tax rate right around 50 cents or 49. If nothing happens then, if you don't do a defeasance, if you don't call a bond election, the tax rate goes from 50 cents to roughly 38 cents. So again, go ahead, ma'am.
33, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say 33? It's 38 cents in fiscal year 2033.
So by paying it off now, again, we're not saving just the principal, we're saving all the interest. So we would be paying on that principal for the next 21 years. And again, at the same time, we're looking at an average decrease of $118.54 in what each taxpayer is going to pay for that owns a homestead. What?
You could go out for a bond earlier than 20 or 30 years.
Exactly.
Maybe Brian will.
But basically, we're saving for the future of our district. It's not going to make a difference as much this year as it will way down the road. And that's kind of what we did with all of the bond refundings, that they saved us a couple $1 million, but they saved us a couple $1 million over 20 years. So I know a lot of us won't be here at that time, but we're fighting to help our future generations of students and taxpayers.
Was this ever brought up before? Right?
No, it hasn't been brought up before, and the reason why is because we did not have enough tax collections to have this kind of surplus, this extra to pay off some of our debt. Because our INS tax rate was artificially low a long time ago. Mr. Krupal, I believe, was here. We did a swap where we moved a whole bunch of our INS values to M&O because we would get more contribution from the state on their side. But because of that, then we weren't able to have enough on our INS to pay our debt. So there was a time where we were having to transfer about $1 million every year from the M&O side to pay our INS debt. But the last several years, what the board has wisely done is, as the state has decreased the M&O, we have increased the INS to keep the tax rate the same so that we could pay off our debt. And to be honest, we would be in a world of trouble right now because the state used to give us $2 million a year to pay our INS bonds. But now, they're like Mr. Aguilera was saying, they're saying that we're richer now because we have higher tax base. And if we hadn't increased it, we wouldn't be able to meet our debts. But right now we've wisely done that. So we actually have a little bit of a surplus, and that gives us this opportunity to not only decrease what the average taxpayer is going to pay, but also pay off some of our existing debt at the same time.
You mentioned something about ADA that it had already plateaued or flatlined. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Certainly. So our ADA, what we're projecting for next year is 3,274.972, or as Mr. Tiavina said, about 3,275, because that's what we have this year. we used to have an ADA that was higher, around 3,600, which what that means is they give you a certain amount of funding per child. This year, it's $6,160 of funding per child. Plus, they give you extra funding for programs such as CTE, special education, and so on. As we have decreased our ADA, not all, the state is saying that we're going to give you less to go ahead and pay for not only your M&O, your general fund, but also to pay your bonds as well too. So that's the problem when you have more students, they say that they'll give you more money. When you have less students, that's why they have decreased. That's why Robert said that this may be the last year that the state kicks in anything to help pay our bonds. And really the only reason why they're probably kicking something in this year is because of the homestead exemption, because we're collecting a whole bunch less in taxes. That's why the taxpayers are paying less. They're saying that they're going to kick in more because again, they increase the homestead exemption.
Great question. My mother to the 89 through 2008. What happened? If that happens again, where my $500,000 home is now worth $250,000.
So if that happens, then we will collect a bunch less taxes with the same tax rate. We would have to raise our taxes to collect the same amount of money to pay our bonds because we can't default on our bonds. Hopefully that won't happen, but that would be another reason why you wouldn't want to, just for this 1 year, decrease our tax rate because we can, and then go back to the taxpayers next year and say, oh, you know what, that's just 1 year, now we're increasing your tax rate again. So this allows us to keep the tax rate the same and still pay off our, again, decrease how much the taxpayers are going to pay. And then if for some reason, like you say, Ms. Ramos, let's say that our homes are worth less next year, then we don't have to increase the tax rate again next year. Go ahead. Did you want to add?
Dr. Pitts? Yes, sir. That's a great question. And I'm not quite sure which board member asked that, but I stated earlier, and Dr. Pitts also, that this coming fiscal year 23 could be, if everything stays as is, meaning next year moving forward stays the same, the district could not be receiving any more state aid. But if we get back, say for example, a 2008 crisis happens, the mortgage crisis, our valuation comes down, every year, and I apologize if I didn't say it earlier, but every year TEA looks at those formulas, the property values and the ADA. So just because you don't receive state aid in fiscal year 23 or 24 doesn't mean it's like that for the rest of the years that you have debt outstanding. If for some reason your valuation goes down and your ADA stays the same or slightly goes up, if your valuation goes down, ADA remains the same or even goes up a little bit, now you've become poor in the eyes of the state. They address every school district who receives state assistance every year. They look at the property values and the ADA. So what happens is value goes down, ADA remains the same. Guess what? There's going to be a column in our spreadsheet, Dr. Pitts knows this, that all of a sudden TA is going to be giving you state assistance again, because now in their eyes, you've become poor. So every year they look at those two main components to make sure, okay, did the valuations change? Did the ADA change? Do they need state assistance or not?
Thank you, Mr. Tijerina. So I stand corrected on that. So basically, if our property values go way down, then you're saying the state will kick in more on their side and we'll be okay. Okay, other questions?
Just trying to play devil's advocate here. Any risk or any danger by doing this?
Okay, let me defer to both Robert or Mr. Aguilera.
Juan, you want to go first?
No, you go ahead and go first. Any risk on the financial end? there's-
No, sir. We don't see any risk and as Mr. Aguilera stated, he has clients that are looking at this for this coming fiscal year 23. I have the same amount, maybe half a dozen. And out of that half a dozen, I've had about 3 or 4 that have been doing these cash defeasances the last 3 years. And we'll be approving a 4th one sometime this month, as early as this week and starting again next week. There's no risk there. Again, if the collections comes down, and I'm gonna turn this over to Mr. Aguilera, if for some reason we don't hit the 96.7% collections and it's actually lower and we don't have enough of the funds to kick in for a cash defeasance, it doesn't have to be on a certain date. We can wait all the way till August 30th or 31st until additional funds come in order to do the defeasance. And that's the only thing I could see, putting a slight kink in this plan. And we haven't ran across any of that with any of our clients. If there's any funds that need to be kicked in, as Dr. Pitt stated earlier, a lot of our clients either use the cash that they have in the reserve that could only be used for debt. And again, I don't see anything outside of that, Mr. Aguilera.
No, the same thing, if I could just dovetail, is that the INS taxes that are collected, as I mentioned initially, the voters authorized you to levy a tax. So you're within the law to be able to do that. And as Robert and Dr. Pitts both mentioned, you can only use INS taxes for payment of bonds. That's it. You can't use it for any other purposes. So if you collect some monies, then those from taxes, then those have to be used only for payment of bonds, principal and interest. As I mentioned, the draft of the defeasance resolution is giving you the district the maximum flexibility, so that we are saying that if you need to defease less amount because the monies don't come in, as Robert is stating, taxes, the levy of the taxes come in less, then you're still okay. If you collect more on the INS for this fiscal year, then that money can be used to pay down more debt. And the resolution allows you to be able to do both. Either you collect less or you collect more.
So talking about the 96.7%, that's conservative. What's generally accepted practice in the business is you use the lowest collection rate for the last 3 years. So 96.7 is the lowest that we've collected in the last 3 years. So we feel fairly confident that we will hit that. But again, it is possible that you could have an anomaly this next year. So this would again require board approval, and we would bring it next week on Tuesday on the 16th. And because it has to be done before we are approving the tax rate, and before we have the public meeting on the 23rd.
Okay, maybe I'm beating a dead horse, but let's suppose the whole country went to watch it, and the tax rate fell to 50%. Does this require us to reduce that debt, or does it authorize us to reduce the debt by a total or by the total we've collected? That didn't make any sense probably, right?
Here, Mr. Aguilar.
Can you rephrase that? I'm sorry, I'm having my connection is real bad. Can you rephrase that, Dr. Pitts? It's
I can, let me try to clarify. Okay.
Okay.
Let's suppose that collections went way off and they were only at suppose 80% or something. And let's suppose that we collected enough to make this year's payment, but not any excess to be able to have the fees. Does
Right.
what we're authorizing require us to do it or authorize us to do it? I mean, we wouldn't have to come out of cash reserves.
no.
Okay.
And then that's a very good question. And again, so the resolution will provide more or less than what we're currently Mr. Tejerina has stated can be paid off with those additional pennies. If you do not collect enough and you can only make a payment on what is due, then you need to do that. And maybe it was a good idea that you went ahead and levied those additional pennies, because you would be in trouble then to pay off the debt, the debt that was due this coming fiscal year.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Tiarina and Mr. Aguilera. We again plan to bring this next week, Tuesday, the cash defeasance to the board for approval.
Thank you, Dr. Pitts, Dr. Bettis, members of the board. We appreciate the opportunity allowing us to participate at the workshop. Thank you all, and I hope you all have a great week and a good evening.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's only an option for the board to consider. So, we're happy to help out in any way. If there's any more questions, we're Robert and I are always available. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Y'all take care.
Okay, so that brings us to what we are posting in the paper this week. Let's take a short look at the budget calendar that I passed out to see where we are. We are right now, we're at 8/8, that blue. We're having a budget workshop. We're going to review the budget, and also we're talking about the tax rate as well too. 8/11 this Thursday, we're posting it in the paper. I have already sent it to the paper, but the reason why we're having the board meeting Monday is because now that we've talked about the cash defeasance, I can make the update and send it to them tomorrow morning to the paper, and they can post the update in Thursday's paper. Just want to clarify that the notice states the maximum tax rate that can be adopted. If for some reason the board does decide on the 16th not to go with the tax defeasance, then the board can end up adopting a minimum rate. So this, I'm sorry, a lesser rate. This will cover us through the cash defeasance. So we're going to talk a little bit about both tax rates, but as you see that on the updated sheet that you have, the M&O tax rate will be going from 1.0265 all the way down to 0.9998. That is the decrease in M&O, and that is because of our increase in property taxes on property values. That 0.9998 will allow us to raise the same amount of money based on the higher taxes that the 1.0265 did this last year. So that's why the state is requiring us to decrease that, and they are saying that they will pick up the difference. On the INS side, we had a 0.4924 last year. We will be increasing to 0.5191 this year. Total tax rate will stay the same, 0.5189. And as you see on the updated document that I passed out, the average taxable value of homesteads will go from $72,807 to $65,003. And the reason for that is because the additional homestead exemption from 25K to 4K, even though the average market value is increasing from 101 to 106, they're going to pay less tax on it. Now that is, again, just the homeowners, the residences, not the business owners. So you see the average tax will decrease from $1,015.87 on a residence to $987.33. And it will be a decrease of $118.54. Again, I will work with the tax assessor tomorrow morning to actually solidify these numbers so that it actually prints out nice and neat for the paper on Thursday. I will take any questions about the notice that will be posted in the paper this Thursday.
refresh my memory, was it there's a tax reduction or an increase on the amount of the dog, the zone homestead and then military? Or, no, everybody?
So everybody,
Everybody,
but just school district.
just homestead, for homestead.
Mhm.
So I know they also did one. 25,000 or 40.
The two propositions that were up, I believe proposition one was for people over 65 or disabled to have right, and then the second one was 40,000, I'm sorry, 25,000 to 40,000 on homesteads. So the tax rate is required to be adopted after the budget. So we're going to move into the budget now, but again, just final summary, we're planning to keep the tax rate the same, overall tax rate the same, and average homestead exemption will decrease by, average tax paid on a homestead will decrease by $118.54 this next year. Okay, so going back to the calendar, you see the 11th, that's when we're going to post it in the paper. Then the 16th isn't on here. The 16th is a regular board meeting, and that's when we will do the cash defeasance. The 23rd is a special board meeting to approve the proposed budget and tax rate. And probably at that time, if we're ready, it'll be health insurance as well too. And the reason why we can't do it next week is we have to do the posting for at least 10 days before we can have the public meeting. So on Thursday, this notice will be posted in the paper, and also the comparison, which we're going to go over in a minute, will be posted on the website this Thursday. So that will, again, on the 23rd, the public meeting, and then we will approve the budget, then we will approve the tax rate on the 23rd, and then finally the approved budget will be posted on the website on the 24th. So let's take a look at the budget right now.
If you want to get a sandwich, Sylvia brought some for you. Also, I want to introduce, Randy. You said Howard. Our new Director of Education, Director of Technology. Been a long week.
So we've talked a lot about the budget, and what you see now on this proposed budget are the new tax rates. So you see the M&O is dropped to 0.9998. The INS has increased to 0.5191, and the total tax rate has stayed the same at 1.5189 at the very top there. Now, what you saw before were we talked about these expenditures last year. There were some revisions after we got our revenues, and I'll talk about why in just a moment. Some of those monies were moved to ESSER 3 and ESSER 2. So if we look at our total revenue, first, you look at the local 9.457, we are looking at a little bit of a decrease in local revenues, and that is because, we are looking at basically not only we're keeping the tax rate the same, but the problem is our total tax base is going to be decreased because of the homestead exemption. So even though our tax rate stays the same, we are collecting on a lower tax base. Again, you saw that the average taxes paid decreased because of the homestead exemption. So the state again has said that they're going to kick in the difference. So you see the state's contribution, $16,682,556. What that is based on is an average ADA of again 2,000. It was 2,437. 2,374. That was the ADA that we had this last year. Now, unfortunately, last year we predicted 2,600 in our budget. We thought that a lot more students would be coming back from COVID than did come. Our saving grace was that there was a hold harmless last year. So even though we only had a 2,374, they basically gave us money for about $2,450, $2,450 ADA. This next year, we're playing it safe. We are projecting less revenue with only 2,374 ADA this next year. And that's how you get the majority of your funding is students coming to class, not necessarily your enrollment. We had about close to 2,600 enrollment this year. I'm sorry, 2,900 enrollment this year, but our ADA is what you're paid on. Now, our federal revenues, we are projecting $1.9 million federal revenues. Those revenues include several things. They include 1, reimbursements from SHARs, 2, reimbursements from grants. You have something called indirect costs. Whenever you have grants, you are allowed a certain rate, a restricted rate for all your title grants, which for us is close to 4.6%. And you have an unrestricted rate, which is over 15% for us on the ESSER grants that come into the general fund. So we're projecting total revenues of a little over $28 million. Now, you notice that the projected expenditures are at the bottom, $28 million as well. I decreased the expenditures on the general fund from what you saw last time and shifted over some of those expenditures to our ESSER 3 and ESSER 2 budgets. We are able to do that this next year, and to a lesser extent, we'll be able to do that in 2023, 2024. But starting in 2025, 2026, we will not be able to do that. And in that case, we're either going to have to decrease expenditures in coming years, or we're going to have to adopt a deficit budget. Now, we have strategically increased our expenditures over the last couple of years because the government has given us these ESSER funds. And if we don't use this money, we're going to lose it. We finished using the ESSER 1 funds. Those are gone at the end of August, but we have already depleted those. The ESSER 2 funds will end at the end of August 31 of 2023, and the ESSER 3 funds will end at the end of August 31 of 2024. So we have to increase our funding these next couple of years if we're going to use the extra funds that the government has given us, because again, they don't carry over beyond the end of the grant period. But again, we are looking forward and realizing that next year we're going to have to decrease our budget probably by a little over $2 million, and the following year as well over a little over $2 million. But again, we're planning ahead to be able to do that. Again, we've increased our budget these last couple of years so that we could use these ESSER funds to help the school district. So that's looking forward to the future. So we are proposing right now a balanced budget of $28 million. Again, my projections have always been conservative, and we have historically in the last couple of years come out pretty well in the end. We're planning to come out a little bit in the black this year as well too. Right now, the state is saying that we have to pay back $2.3 million at the end of the year. And that sounds very scary, but this is something that we planned for at the beginning of the year, because we planned for, even though we built 2,600 into the budget, we planned that, hey, our ADA may not be where it is. We are planning on getting $850,000 back in state aid from our property value protests. We hire Lineberger to do that. So that $2.3 million that right now the state is saying we owe them at the end of the year, after that $850,000 will be closer to $1.5 million. But we have, again, planned for that, and we plan to be a little bit in the black because, again, we budgeted for that. We again try to be a little bit conservative every year because we don't know what our ADA is. We're planning 2374 for next year based on what we have this year, but you don't know until the kids start coming to school. You can tell a little bit in the first 6 weeks and second 6 weeks, and then you can adjust your expenditures the rest of the year based on, hey, we're gonna get less funding because our students aren't coming, as many students aren't coming as we planned, so we need to reduce our funding the rest of the year. So we look at that during the year when we plan for it. So at the end of the year, we're not surprised and we have a huge reduction in our revenue and we're caught off guard. So let's take a look at the foods. There's a transfer out that's on here that wasn't on the previous one. So $750,000 transfer out. We are budgeting that we might have a shortfall of $750,000 in food service next year. As you see, there's a transfer in on the food service column on the fourth line on 8911, transfer in so that they can have enough revenue to meet their planned expenditures for next year. So let's review why we're at this point. Food service, you get revenues mainly, as you see, from the feds, that 1.7 million. The rest is negligible. So we'll talk about the feds. You get a certain amount of money for every breakfast that you serve, every lunch that you serve, and every dinner that you serve. So at the same time as we've had we've had basically less students attending school because of COVID. Now, starting next year, the government is reducing the amount of money they're going to reimburse for breakfasts and lunches because they kicked in more during the last 2 years for the pandemic. Now they're saying they're going to go back to regular rates. Well, unfortunately, the amount of meals we've served hasn't gone back to the amount before the pandemic. So we are working hard to try to get more dinners served. And to also maximize the number of breakfasts and lunches. But we are, if for some reason we do have more breakfast and lunches and dinners served, and we don't need that whole $750,000 transfer out at the end of the year, we're not obligated to do it. We are just budgeting for it. So we are not caught off guard at the end of the year. This year, we're going to be bringing to the board next week some amendments. Amendments are when you are moving money from one function to the other of what the board approved were. We are not increasing the total budget for what we plan to spend for last year, but in some categories, because of ESSER and how we've used money in ESSER, we have we're going to have amendments where we are moving money from one to the other. And again, this year, more than other years because of the flexibility of ESSER. Whatever is eligible to be paid in ESSER, we have channeled those funds to ESSER. So next week when we come, you'll see that we are moving money in an amendment for 2021, 2022 in several of these categories. But we're also going to move, we're looking at close to $250,000 to $300,000 in food service to pay for this year because we cannot end up with the negative balance of food service at the end of this year as well too.
Do we get reimbursed for anything, like you said, for the dinner?
We-
Like at the high school, between activities after school, before going to band or before going to certain activities, we used to run them through there.
Yes, we get reimbursed $3.66 for each one of those dinners. So yes, we do. And if we can take advantage of that and maximize that, then that's going to help increase our revenue. And because of that, we'll have to transfer less money from our general fund into food service at the end of the year.
Dr. Bessanice has already preliminary scheduled a meeting with Ms. Butler about that and the two principals say we've got to capitalize on that.
Especially the breakfast. Is that still being served in the room?
And each student is eligible, right? They're able to get them.
Yes, because we are part of the community provision eligibilities. If Ms. Butler was here to correct me, I'm sure, but it's CPE. We are district wide. We get for every single student, even though everyone, as long as a minimum percentage of your students are below the free reduced lunch line, if you apply, every single student in your district is eligible, and we have applied and we have been accepted.
And I don't know if this has been asked, but if you got, like, Mr. Reyes was talking about, you got an activity going on after school. Let's just use football. Did those kids pick up a meal for dinner?
Yes, sir, they could.
That's why we want to be strategic about that, about doing that.
It's just easy.
I would do this here. My kid would be dropped off at like, I think at like 3:15. And then for like 2 months, not until 3:45. Oh, we're serving lunch. Then you get dropped off at 3:15. Are you not serving lunch anymore? And that was, as a parent, that happened on and off all year.
So we are gonna try to maximize dinners. I mean, for the children, it's an extra meal that some of them may not have, and at the same time, it's a benefit to the district. So it's a benefit to both the child and to the district if we maximize the dinners that we're serving. I believe they do. They can't take it and go with them, unfortunately. So
Now, when they, elementary, be able to go to Gillette and vice versa, in the afternoon.
we haven't.
We had to delay the buses because of that, because they can't get on the bus with. They don't need it there.
And-
That's why there was a lot of-
And that's why we have staggered start times, because the buses normally, again, pick up elementary and drop them off first, and then the same thing middle and the same thing high school, because there's not room on the buses to do it all at once. So on the debt, so moving to the debt column, again, we've already talked about this. This is what we're projecting from local revenues. We would have to do a defeasance next week in order to keep that tax rate at 0.5191 on the INS. This may be the last year that we get money from the state, because again, they're saying we're a richer district now that we have, it's basically two things. They're saying that we have less kids and we have more property values. So basically, when they divide it, you have more property values per kid. And federal revenues, this will keep going in the future. And as you can see, we're projecting a surplus, which will be used to pay off some of that additional debt. So if you look at the bottom column where we are with fund balance, we're projecting a balanced budget for M&O, the general fund. So we're projecting that our fund balance will stay the same. Our food service, we're projecting at the end of this year, it'll be down to about 55,000, but that's only because we're going to be doing an amendment to transfer some money over there to keep it in the black this year. We're required to keep that in the black. So next year, again, we're projecting, even with the 750,000, we're projecting a little bit of a loss, ending with the fund balance, basically very little, 18,159 in food service. But again, if we do those things, extra dinner collections, this is budgeting conservatively. Hopefully, we will have a little bit more of a fund balance, or we won't have to transfer the 750,000 from our general fund. And then again, we talked about fund balance here, even though it shows that we may have a $1.87 million fund balance. We're going to look at that in February after we make our major bond payments and use hopefully close to $1 million plus this 354,000 to pay off some of that big debt schedule. So we don't want to end up with this big, we want a little bit of a buffer in case for some reason the values go low one year and we don't have enough to collect that one year. But we believe that right now that we have a healthy enough balance and our property values have risen higher. And our INS tax rate is at the rate to collect that we need to pay our bonds. We believe that we don't need that much of a safety net. We're going to use that to pay off in the future some of our existing debt. I'll take any questions that you have on the budget.
You mentioned earlier, and I think we can talk about it later, but we actually have 2,900 enrolled.
No, it was close, it was like 28, well, it was like 28.76.
Okay, let's say 28,
Okay.
but actually only 2374 actually came in.
on an average day. So some of the students were absent one day, some of the students were absent another day, but on an average day, we only had 2,374 come in. So if we were able to, Mr. Garcia, if we were able to get, let's say, 2,500 students come in on a day, that would dramatically increase our revenues, and that would really, we have a couple of things that could really help us. One is attendance, and two is also if for some reason the state comptroller and the Claiborne County, those appraisal districts and the comptroller could get on the same page, because we lose between $1 and $2 billion every year in revenues because the state says we should collect more, but the county says, no, your values are here. So what happens is the school district gets left off in the middle. That would really help us. And if we had increased students coming to school every year, that would help us too. And to be honest, we're going to really have to consider next year when ESSER funds go away, we're going to have to consider where we are with both of those two things and consider looking at our staff across the board. We would not let anybody go. We would reduce staffing by attrition. But those will be things that will need to be looked at seriously next year.
Texas is one of 6. There's only 6 states in the United States that still use ADA. All the other states use enrollment.
Wow. So that's what.
You know, trying to voice that we need to do enrollment.
We also need to be talking to them about giving us money for security and monitoring.
Oh, God, yes, yeah.
Social work services. We haven't gotten that. It's something that I think we should.
I know the state thinks that, oh, we're richer now, but they look at the expenses we just did this with that, so. Yeah, absolutely.
That's a good point. And what hasn't been built in here and what could help us is money from the state or the feds for security. So because we've been told that there's going to be some money coming, we haven't been given a number or anything. So we haven't built that into the revenues this year. So we could end up with more revenues depending on what they decide to give us.
If they do give us money, they probably will. I hope that there are no stipulations.
Oh,
Well, that's what you can ask for. You can write that.
Item 71,
Item 71.
bank service in the M&O column. What's that?
Okay. Oh, okay. So that is 14 years ago, we took out something called a maintenance tax note, which you can do on the M&O side. It was to pay for upgrades in HVAC. And the reason why you can do that is on the M&O side is because you get a guarantee that the amount that you're going to save in reduced electricity costs will cover your note that you have every year. And our note every year has been basically $168,900. We budget a little bit of a leeway in there, but so this next year, come February, we will have paid that off. Okay. $8,000 in interest and all the rest in principal. So yes, that was the one that we talked about last time. We're going to have that paid off, and theoretically, we won't have to pay that anymore. However, we're doing our facility audit in the fall, and they're going to come back with major facility upgrades. Now, we don't have the money to go out for more bond debt on the INS side. What we could do is we could take out, again, another maintenance tax note to do the HVAC upgrades, which are sorely needed. And again, what would happen is we would get a guarantee from whoever is doing the upgrades that the cost of the upgrades would be spread out over a number of years so that we could pay for it every year from the amount we are saving in reduced electricity costs. So they would make our payment over a number of years to make sure that would happen. So again, that's something that when we probably at the beginning of the year, we'll be bringing our our facility assessment report. And then we will put together a long-range plan, because there's going to be no way that we're going to be able to do everything all together. We have roofs, we have HVAC, we have vehicles, we have parking lots that are going to need repaired. So like Mr. Garcia said, that they see us as a rich district, but we haven't had the money for 2 decades to keep up with our infrastructure. And we're going to have to do that sooner or later, because otherwise you're just being reactive. And when something falls apart, then you're not budgeting for it. We want to be proactive, where we know exactly what we're going to spend for the next 10 years in all our infrastructure and vehicle costs. So any other, there's one other thing, going back to the infrastructure costs, and kind of with the school safety as well. We're planning to build a fence around the high school, and that, again, that is that's an expense to the district. That's a little bit around over $100,000 just for a fence. So the costs are expensive, and we're budgeting into this security costs and upgrades. A lot of it is you see in maintenance, because basically anything that we're doing that's physical is coming out of the maintenance budget. So we're planning to, we're hopefully planning to have that built before school starts. That would be great to be able to have our students and staff protected.
Well, you know, appropriate, whenever you want to spend.
We have what I consider to be a glitch in one of our policies. It was amended sometime back. I don't know why, I don't know how, we'll figure it out something, but the glitch in our policy allows for the district, if an item is being purchased through buy bid, it does not require board approval. This fence, the bids came in. One of the bidders said, if we go now, we believe we can have this before school starts. And so, okay, good.
And they walked it, they did the whole survey, they were very
Yes.
thorough about their, different than the other person, the other one who submitted a bid. And then Mingo couldn't get another, somebody else submitted.
And we also visited with AEP, and what's going to happen if for some reason where we move the fence is going to be in, I guess, overlapping their boundaries. They haven't had the surveyors out there yet, but they said if for some reason that happens, we have it in writing that they will pay for the cost of moving the fence and reconfiguring it. So it's not going to be, the advantage of doing it now is that we're going to try to get it done before school starts.
Now, do we have a map where this is gonna go that we can see, or is it flagged out there already?
I'm just curious if they got an automatic gate and like collar. No, so it's just open, it's open anyway.
Okay. See if we can bring it up. We might need Dr. Vasquez's help.
You know,
I've got some, it's actually a budget question.
Yeah, so they got-
Esther does not yet the budget.
He needs to email it. Yeah. We want to me or to you?
Is that a document?
Okay, I'm sorry. While they're working on that, go ahead, Mr. Cooper.
Esther does not hit revenue.
That is, well, ESSER hits revenue, but it's in a different fund. So,
On the budget.
right, it doesn't hit on the 3 budgets that we have. It's considered a grant, and these aren't the grant budgets because the board does not approve the grant budgets.
Esther impacts the expenses by lessening some of the categories.
That is correct.
What I'd like to suggest we do, not today, and not even in the next couple of weeks, you've got your hands full with getting your budget and all this. But I'd really like to see an ESSER account.
Okay.
And with the intent of, we need to start looking down the road, of what areas are going to have to be sustained, that are kind of not being sustained through the monthly budgets. Just so kind of we know where we're heading for, 24 and some of those years when the ESSER funds go completely.
So let me make a recommendation that maybe the October board meeting, and the reason for that is because then our budget year ends August 31, and then we will have a year to make sure that anything else that has been encumbered but not paid yet can be done.
Costs 5.0 in the 2025. We are very
So just to review, we will be taking this to the board on the 23rd. We'll have a public meeting before that, right ahead of time. The notice will be posted in the paper this Thursday. Are there any other questions on the budget or the tax rate?
A little bit confused on the red line,
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, let's take a look at that.
right here.
Okay, let's take a look at it. So this is the notice that's required to be posted on our district website. It will be posted on Thursday. It compares last year to this year. And unfortunately, as Mr. Kufal said, because of ESSER funds, there are some, it looks a little bit unusual that we're spending less on instruction this year than we are last year. But if you look at the note at the very bottom, that once you include ESSER, we are actually spending $17 million in instruction next year instead of $14 million. So again, this is a required document, but it's only required for your general fund and your food service and your debt service fund. So the comparisons are not exactly apples to apples, and we try to clarify that at the very bottom. So what this shows is how much you spent in a function last year, how much you budgeted in a function last year, how much you're budgeting this year, and how much per student. And again, also note at the bottom, we budgeted $5,385 per student last year instruction. We are budgeting with ESSER $6,138 per student. And then you can see in each function how much we are budgeted last year and this year, and the per student revenue going all the way down for each function. And then total at the bottom, 36 million versus 35 million. Again, that's because we moved some expenditures to ESSER.
I know you have a percentage of where you're supposed to spend your money. You already maxed it out on instruction.
We haven't because we haven't maxed it out in the first year. We have 2 more years. Okay.
I know it's 30% on PPE and 30% spending on instruction. Did you take, let's say they gave you 30%, the whole 30% put it in there? Or did you only put 15% to pay for instruction?
So, okay, so the requirement is 20%. You're required to spend at least 20% of the ESSER 3 on instruction. And what we try to do is from the general fund, you saw a decrease in the general fund. We try to move as much into instruction as possible in ESSER 3 to try to maximize, to make sure, again, we're way over that 20%. And we're going to do the same thing this next year, because again, you're allowed to pay for almost anything from ESSER, from salaries all the way to utilities to basically any expenditure to keep the district running. But like you said, we're aware of that the primary goal is instruction, so we're trying to maximize as much as we can and move as much as we can into function 11 in ESSER 3.
All of that in the blue has been spent. In the blue.
Okay,
So
the
you got
$2,939,000.
Oh,
That's what I added up.
that is,
All of that was put into the proposed budget.
all of that has been added to what we had in instruction already, additional instructional monies in 2022, 2023. Above and beyond what we put in 2021, 2022. So we are adding extra money into functional lab and instruction from both ESSER 3 and ESSER 2 this next year. And again, this will be posted Thursday on our website.
So. Whereas we're looking at a 1, 2, 3, 4 column. Back one page, or back to the budget, we've got the M&O, food service, the INS and the total. There, we've got the 4 columns. Deep in the recesses of your office, there's a 6 or 7 column.
Well, actually more than that, because every single grant is another column. So we have Title I, Title II, but you're right. There's all these are the ones that come before the board and are approved before the board. But you're right, there's not only all the grants, but then there's also, since we are self-funded, we have a health insurance and we also have a workers' comp fund as well too, that are there as well too. Okay. We're gonna bring up the map of the proposed fence and. So use mouse over.
Are we through with this other part?
Let me let Dr. Sandoval start with the process and what we're planning to do. Mr. Maddox,
With the workshop, yes.
Yes, sir.
are we allowed to discuss this right now?
I prefer that we wait until our meeting that's coming up where it's more on point. I know it's financial related in general, but it's not specifically noticed in the agenda. And I think it's a broader discussion. Would you agree with that?
The only concern would be that we need to move on it so that way we can get the fence. I know it doesn't need board approval, but we wanted to just at least inform. So, I mean, if we have to wait till the 16th to inform, but
Why don't we do this? Since it doesn't require board approval, why don't you email us the map tomorrow?
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. Any other questions on the budget or tax rate? Very welcome. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah.
They haven't put you in the fence.
Yes.
And 10 years it's starting to make sense.
No, they don't have
Oh, back to me, I suppose, okay. All right, there being no further action, I will declare this workshop adjourned at 7:07 p.m.
Thank you, board.
Dr. Hill, coming to us from South Furious, the technology director.